The biting wind that swept across Iron Creek carried the scent of pine and the impending promise of a heavy snow. It was Christmas Eve, yet the old depot station sat hollow and half asleep, a refuge only for those with nowhere else to go. Mai Lin sat on the splintered bench, pulling the high collar of her grey, threadbare cheongsam tighter against her throat. The traditional silk, worn thin by years of hardship, offered little protection against the harsh American winter. Her ribs ached, and her spirit felt as bruised as the darkening sky above. She set her small carpet bag at her feet. It contained everything she owned: a spare tunic, a cracked comb, and a one-way train ticket she had purchased with her last coins. She was heading west, simply to keep moving, running from the memory of a husband lost to the railroad dynamite and a life that had turned cruel in his absence. Beside her boot, lying on the cold platform, were two small cloth dolls. They were rough things, stitched from scraps of denim and wool, with uneven button eyes. Mai Lin picked them up, her thumb brushing the yarn hair. She had made them weeks ago, intending to sell them, but they had become her only company, silent witnesses to her solitude. The train whistle moaned in the distance, a ghostly sound that echoed the hollowness in her chest. The lantern above her flickered, casting her shadow against the peeling paint of the station wall. She sank deeper into her thin coat, resigning herself to the freeze. "Daddy, look! Can we bring her home for Christmas?" The voice was bright and sudden, cutting through the wind. Mai Lin looked up, startled. Standing before her was a little girl, no older than 6, wrapped in a heavy wool coat over a light floral prairie dress that brushed the tops of her boots. She had wide, curious eyes and a mess of curls escaping her bonnet. Beside the child stood a man who looked like he had been carved from the very landscape itself. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather jacket and a wide-brimmed cowboy hat dusted with fresh snow. His face was rugged, marked by the sun, but his eyes were gentle. The cowboy tipped his hat slightly, an apologetic expression softening his features. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Daisy here has a heart bigger than her common sense sometimes. We didn't mean to disturb you." "Those dolls," Daisy said, pointing a mittened finger. "They look lonely. Like my dolls at home." Mai Lin flushed and looked down at her lap. "They are. Just scraps," she said, her English accented and quiet. "They're beautiful," the man said. He glanced at the empty tracks and then back to Mai Lin, taking in the thinness of her grey cheongsam and the way she shivered. "We were just heading back to the ranch. We live a few miles out, near the Shadow Ridge. If you're waiting on the midnight train, you've got a long freeze ahead of you." Mai Lin gripped the dolls tighter. "I am fine. Thank you." Daisy tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, look at her dress. She's shaking. It's Christmas Eve. We have plenty of stew." The man exhaled slowly, crouching down so he was eye level with Mai Lin. "My name is Jack. This is my daughter, Daisy. We aren't looking to trouble you, but I wouldn't feel right leaving a soul out here in this weather. You're welcome to a warm meal and a fire. We can bring you back for the train whenever you like." Mai Lin hesitated. Trust was a currency she had spent long ago, but the cold was gnawing at her bones. She looked at Daisy, whose face held nothing but innocent hope. "I have no money to pay you," Mai Lin whispered. "Didn't ask for any," Jack said, straightening up. He offered a gloved hand. "Come on. The snow is starting to stick." Mai Lin took his hand. It was warm and calloused, a working man's hand. He helped her up into the wagon waiting by the post. As they pulled away from the station, leaving the lonely platform behind, Mai Lin wondered if this was a mistake or the first stroke of luck she had seen in years. The wagon rattled along the narrow dirt trail as the snow began to fall in earnest, thick white flakes that clung to the mane of Jack's chestnut mare. The lantern hanging from the side of the wagon cast a golden glow against the snow-laden juniper trees. Daisy sat between them, chattering about the horses and the Christmas tree they hadn't decorated yet. "Is it far?" Mai Lin asked softly, looking out at the vast, darkened hills. "Not far," Jack answered. "About 3 miles. The house keeps the heat well." Daisy leaned against My Lin's arm. Daddy makes the best venison stew. He puts special berries in it. Are you hungry? My Lin nodded, the truth overriding her pride. Yes. A little. Good, Daisy declared. Because I can't eat it all. By the time they reached the ranch, My Lin's fingers were numb. The house was a modest log structure tucked at the foot of a red sandstone ridge, with smoke curling invitingly from the chimney. A corral stood to the side, where 3 horses shifted in the shelter of the barn. Welcome home, Jack said. He helped My Lin down, his grip steady on her elbow. Inside, the cabin was a sanctuary of warmth. A large stone fireplace dominated the room, the flames cracking and popping. The air smelled of wood smoke, leather, and the savory richness of the stew simmering on the stove. It was a masculine space, tidy but lived in, devoid of a woman's touch yet undeniably comforting. Sit by the fire, Jack instructed, taking her thin coat. He paused when he saw the grey cheongsam more clearly in the light, noting the fraying silk, but he said nothing, only hanging her coat beside his own. They ate at a small wooden table. The stew was thick and hot, and the first spoonful brought tears to My Lin's eyes. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. Jack watched her with a quiet intensity, ensuring her bowl was refilled before she could even ask. Daisy chattered on, explaining the names of her dolls and the personalities of the barn cats. You are good with her, My Lin observed later, as Jack cleared the table. She makes it easy, Jack replied. She's been the light of this place for a long time. When the meal was done, Jack set up a cot in the small spare room. It's clean sheets, he said. Sleep as long as you need. The train doesn't run on Christmas morning anyway. My Lin lay down in the darkness, the heavy quilt pulled up to her chin. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jack humming a low tune and Daisy whispering goodnight to her toys. For the first time in months, the knot of anxiety in My Lin's stomach loosened. She fell asleep to the sound of the wind, safe on the other side of the wall. Morning brought a brilliant, blinding white sunlight that reflected off the fresh snow. My Lin woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She dressed quickly, smoothing her wrinkled cheongsam, and stepped into the main room. Daisy was already awake, sitting on the rug with the 2 dolls My Lin had carried. Look, Daddy. The dolls like it here, Daisy chirped. After breakfast, My Lin insisted on helping. She washed the dishes with efficient, practiced hands, then followed Jack and Daisy out to the barn. The air was crisp, the sky a piercing blue. Jack was tending to a grey gelding, his movement slow and deliberate. He's shy, Jack explained, patting the horse's neck. Takes a while to trust folks. My Lin stepped forward. She had grown up in a village where oxen and horses were part of daily life. She held out a hand, palm open. The gelding sniffed her, then lowered his head, blowing warm breath against her fingers. She scratched behind his ears, murmuring softly in her native tongue. Jack watched her, a look of surprise crossing his face. He usually nips at strangers. You've got a way about you, My Lin. Animals know when a heart is quiet, she said simply. Over the next few days, the snow kept the roads impassable, and the ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. My Lin mended Jack's torn work shirts and taught Daisy how to make intricate paper birds, while Jack showed her how to handle the livestock. The isolation of the ranch felt less like a prison and more like a fortress against the world. Daisy began to cling to My Lin, calling her Thmayo at first, then slipping occasionally into Mamamai, a slip of the tongue that made Jack's eyes soften and My Lin's heart ache with a longing she thought she had buried. But the peace was fragile. On the 4th afternoon, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the quiet. Jack stiffened, looking out the front window. A woman on a spotted mare was riding up the drive. She looked rough, her face worn by hard living, her dark hair windblown. Stay here, Jack told My Lin and Daisy, his voice hard. He stepped out onto the porch. My Lin watched from the window. The woman dismounted, her movements jerky. She walked up to Jack, and even through the glass, My Lin could see the tension in her posture. I'm here for my girl, Jack, the woman said, her voice loud enough to carry inside. You left her, Clara, Jack replied, his tone like granite. 5 years ago. You walked out that door and didn't look back. I made a mistake. I was young. I'm her mother. Clara tried to push past him, but Jack blocked the way. You're a stranger to her. You can't just waltz back in here because you ran out of money or luck. Clara's eyes narrowed. She looked past Jack, spotting My Lin in the window. Who is that? You replace me with her? A foreigner. My Lin is a guest. Go home, Clara. You aren't taking Daisy. Clara spat on the ground. I have rights. She's mine. You lost those rights when you left a 1-year-old in a crib and vanished, Jack growled. Get off my land. Clara glared at him, a mix of desperation and malice in her eyes. This isn't over. She mounted her horse and rode off, but the venom in her voice lingered. Inside, Daisy was hiding behind the sofa, trembling. My Lin sat beside her, wrapping her arms around the child. Jack came back in, looking aged by 10 years. He sank into a chair, running a hand over his face. She won't stop, he muttered. Clara never did know when to let go of something she thought she could sell. My Lin froze. Sell? Jack looked at her, his eyes bleak. Clara didn't come back for love. She's in trouble. I heard rumors in town last week that she's got debts with bad men. She thinks Daisy is a bargaining chip. A heavy dread settled over the house. That night, Jack checked the locks twice and kept his rifle by the door. My Lin barely slept, listening to the wind and imagining it was the sound of returning hooves. 2 days later, the threat materialized. It was dusk when My Lin went to the woodshed to fetch kindling. The snow was falling again, muffling sound. She heard voices coming from the shadows behind the barn, urgent, angry whispers. I told you, I can't just grab her, a woman's voice hissed. Clara. You owe $300, Clara, a man's voice replied. It was deep, raspy, and cruel. The buyers in the city pay good money for pretty little girls. They don't care where she comes from. You get her, or we take it out of your hide. Jack will kill me. Not if we're gone before he knows. Get the girl. Now. My Lin dropped the wood, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned to run back to the house, to warn Jack, but a hand clamped over her mouth. She struggled, kicking out, but a second man dragged her into the darkness of the tack room and threw her down. Stay put, China doll, the man sneered, locking the door from the outside. My Lin screamed, pounding on the heavy wood, but the wind stole her voice. She heard the barn door creak, a muffled cry, and the sound of galloping horses fading into the night. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She threw her weight against the door, again and again, until the rusted latch gave way. She sprinted to the house. Jack! Jack! Jack met her on the porch, his face pale. Daisy? She's not in her room. They took her, My Lin gasped, pointing toward the ridge. Clara and a man. They are going to sell her. I heard them. Jack didn't waste a second. He grabbed his rifle and his coat. Saddle the mare, he commanded, his voice shaking with a terrifying rage. They rode out together, Jack on the chestnut and My Lin on the grey gelding she had befriended. The tracks were visible in the fresh snow, heading east toward the old mining canyons. It was treacherous ground, a labyrinth of stone and ice. They pushed the horses hard, the cold stinging their faces. After an hour, the tracks led them into a narrow box canyon, a dead end used by miners years ago. The faint glow of a campfire flickered against the canyon walls. Jack signaled for silence. He dismounted, rifle in hand, moving with the stealth of a predator. My Lin followed, her heart in her throat. In the clearing, Daisy sat on a rock, her hands bound with rough rope, sobbing. Clara stood nearby, looking anxious, while a large man, the one My Lin had heard, paced back and forth. Another man stood guard by the horses. "Stop crying, brat," the large man, Harlan, growled. "You're going on a trip." "I want my daddy," Daisy wailed. "He ain't your daddy," Harlan laughed cruel and sharp. "Tell her, Clara. Tell her who her daddy really is." Clara flinched. "Harlan, don't. Jack picked you up like a stray dog," Harlan spat at the girl. "You ain't his blood." Clara here ran off with a drummer, not the rancher. "Jack just was fool enough to keep you." Mylin saw Jack stiffen in the shadows, but he didn't waver. He stepped into the light, the rifle leveled at Harlan's chest. "Let her go," Jack said. His voice was quiet, deadly. Harlan spun around, reaching for his pistol, but stopped when he saw the barrel of Jack's Winchester. "Well, the cowboy arrives." "You hear what I said, Jack? The kid ain't yours." Jack's eyes didn't leave Harlan. "I heard you. And I don't give a damn. She's my daughter." Clara stepped back, trembling. "Jack, please. I didn't want this." "You brought wolves to her door, Clara," Jack said. "Step away from her." "You shoot me, my partner shoots the girl," Harlan sneered, nodding to the man by the horses who had drawn his gun on Daisy. The standoff hung in the freezing air, a fragile thread about to snap. Mylin knew Jack couldn't take both men at once without risking Daisy. She had to act. While their attention was locked on Jack, Mylin moved. She crept through the jagged rocks behind Daisy. The grey of her cheongsam blended with the stone and shadows. She reached the rock where Daisy sat. The guard was distracted, watching Jack. Mylin pulled a small knife from her boot, a tool she had carried since leaving the train station. With a swift, silent motion, she sliced the ropes binding Daisy's wrists. "Run to Jack," she whispered in Daisy's ear. Daisy didn't hesitate. She scrambled off the rock and bolted toward her father. "Hey!" the guard shouted, turning his gun. Jack fired. The shot echoed like thunder in the canyon. He didn't shoot to kill, but the bullet sparked off the rock right next to the guard's head, sending stone fragments flying. The guard dropped his gun in panic and scrambled backward. Harlan cursed and raised his pistol, but Mylin picked up a heavy stone and hurled it with all her might. It struck Harlan in the shoulder, ruining his aim. His shot went wild into the dirt. Jack cycled the lever of his rifle. "Next one goes between your eyes," he roared, stepping forward to shield Daisy, who was now clinging to his leg. Harlan looked at Jack, then at the furious woman standing with a rock in her hand, and finally at his terrified partner. He spat on the ground. "Not worth a bullet." He mounted his horse and galloped past them, disappearing into the night. The guard followed close behind. Silence returned to the canyon, broken only by Daisy's sobs. Clara stood alone by the fire, shivering. Jack dropped to his knees, burying his face in Daisy's hair. "I've got you, baby. I've got you." "He said you aren't my daddy," Daisy cried. Jack pulled back, framing her face with his large hands. "Look at me. Blood doesn't make a father, Daisy. Love does. I have loved you since the second I saw you, and I will love you until the day I die. You are mine. Always." Mylin watched them, tears freezing on her cheeks. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Jack reached out and pulled her into the embrace. The three of them huddled together in the snow, a family forged in fire and ice. Clara watched them for a moment, the realization of what she had lost finally sinking in. She turned to her horse, mounting slowly. "I won't come back," she whispered to the wind. And she didn't. The ride back to the ranch was slow and quiet. When they arrived, the sun was just beginning to crest over the red ridges, painting the snow in hues of pink and gold. Jack carried a sleeping Daisy into her room and tucked her in. He came back out to the main room where Mylin was warming her hands by the rekindled fire. "You saved her," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "You risked your life for a child you've known a week." "She is a good child," Mylin said softly. "And you are a good man." Jack stepped closer, taking her hands. The heat from his palm seeped into her cold skin. "My Lynn, I know you were heading west. I know you have a ticket in your bag." My Lynn looked down. "Yes." "Don't use it," Jack said. "Stay. Not as a guest. Stay with us." "You do not know me, Jack. I am a widow with nothing." "I know you," he insisted. "I know you have the heart of a lioness. I know you make this house feel like a home for the first time in years. Daisy needs you. And I think I need you too." My Lynn looked up into his eyes and saw the raw honesty there. She saw a future that wasn't cold and lonely, but warm and full of life. "I have nowhere else I wish to be," she whispered. Jack smiled, a genuine, tired smile that reached his eyes. "Merry Christmas, my Lynn." "Merry Christmas, Jack." Spring arrived late that year, turning the valley into a carpet of wildflowers. The snow melted from the ridges, feeding the creeks until they sang. On the porch of the log house, My Lynn sat on the swing, sewing a new dress for Daisy. The grey cheongsam was gone, replaced by a simple blue dress that matched the sky. Jack walked up the steps, wiping sweat from his brow, a content smile on his face. "Daisy found a nest of blue jays in the barn," he said, sitting beside her. My Lynn smiled, resting her hand on her stomach, which had just begun to swell with new life. "She will want to keep them." "She wants to keep everything," Jack laughed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Just like her daddy kept you." Daisy ran onto the porch, her hands full of wildflowers. "Mama! Daddy! Look!" As the little girl squeezed between them, holding up her treasures, My Lynn looked out at the horizon. The train tracks were miles away, a distant memory. She was no longer the woman on the bench. She was home.